Dexter's Laboratory, or Dexter's Lab for short, is known by many as the animated series that put Cartoon Network on the map. Back in the early 90s, Cartoon Network was mostly just a channel that aired plenty of old Hanna-Barbera and Looney Tunes cartoons because that was all it had at the time. But after a few years of getting off the ground, the channel put its hand in the pot and created its own original animated series, that of course being Dexter's Lab. This was the show that signified a push towards brand new, original cartoons for the network and kickstarted the entire wave of cartoons that took over following the rest of the late 90s and early 2000s. Dexter's Lab was well received by kids and adults of all ages and has since gone on to be recognized as one of the all-time greats. Dexter's Lab was also, coincidentally enough, the first Cartoon Network original series that I personally became attached to when I was a young kid, with the Powerpuff Girls overtaking it just a short while later. I don't remember the exact time frame that I discovered the channel for the first time, but if I had to guess, it was probably during the year 2000 when I was about 4 years old and my parents started allowing me to watch broadcast television rather than the Disney DVDs and Sesame Street VHS tapes they had to distract me with for my first few years of life. Also coincidentally enough, the Gameboy Advance game Dexter's Lab, Deesaster Strikes was one of the first video games I ever owned. I received my very first ever video game system in the form of a silver-wide Game Boy Advance for my 6th birthday, along with games like Punch King, NASCAR Heat 2002, Super Mario Bros. Advance, Jimmy Neutron Boy Genius, Spider-Man, Wario Land 3, and Pokemon Blue. Of those titles, I'm sure you can guess which one of them I played the most, but that's not to say that I didn't have fond memories with the rest of those games. Yeah, believe it or not, the very first handheld video game I ever played was Punch King of all things. In fact, I still own most of them to this very day. To think that was almost 20 years ago both scares and amazes me at the same time. Unfortunately, stupid pre-teen me thought that selling my video games to GameStop was a good idea back then, and dumb old kid Shadow Streak decided to go ahead and trade in his physical copy of Deesaster Strikes for like $1.50. I've only ever traded in video games once in my entire life, and boy do I still regret it to this day. Take it from me, trading in your old games is never worth it. I don't remember every game that I forfeited that day, but I know it's the reason why I no longer own Wrath of Cortex or Enter the Dragonfly for the Nintendo GameCube. Not that those games are particularly good, but they were my first Crash and Spyro games respectively, so they do hold some significance in my heart. I have not touched Deesaster Strikes in over 10 years. In fact, my playthrough felt like it was the very first time I ever truly did experience this game, because let me tell you, I had a good reason for trading this in back in the day. Experiencing Dexter's Lab Deesaster Strikes in the present as an adult, however, I see some merit in this game compared to what younger me perceived as being a frustratingly difficult experience. I mean, don't get me wrong, I know I wasn't as good at video games back then compared to where I am now, but damn, I must have sucked if I never made it past the second or third area because this game isn't very hard. Deesaster Strikes was released in 2001 and produced by BAM Entertainment, the same company responsible for Powerpuff Girls' Relish Rampage, which I had recently discussed. This time around, however, I feel their efforts had gone into a more successful product because this is definitely a game I can recommend to anyone looking to play a decent Dexter's Lab video game. This is a handheld title, so it's not going to blow you away or anything, but I'd say it's a relatively enjoyable experience overall. The game features you playing as Dexter after his sister Dee Dee manages to break into one of his machines and dissolve into 124 miniature versions of herself, which scatter all across his lab into several different sectors, leaving mayhem and destruction in their wake. It is then up to Dexter to recapture every single mini DD and encase them back in the machine so that he can reverse the effects and turn his sister back to normal so that she will stop wreaking havoc in his lab, and so his parents don't find out. And despite the premise, that's all I can really say for the plot because that's as deep as it gets. There's no grand extravagant narrative, nor should anyone really expect that from a Dexter's Lab Game Boy Advance game. I mean, I don't know, maybe you want a 3D Dexter's Lab game that takes place in his giant lab or something, but sadly, I don't think that's ever going to happen. Instead, here we have an isometric platformer in which Dexter is capable of wandering around his lab using 8-directional movement to defeat enemies, jump over pits and platforms, and capture his sister's clones before it's too late. Dexter's movement might be a little disorienting to get used to at first, especially to somebody who hasn't played top-down games of this type before, because pressing up on the D-pad doesn't actually cause Dexter to move directly upwards on screen. Rather, he moves northeast. Imagine rotating your Game Boy Advance 45 degrees clockwise in order to play the game. That's basically how Dexter's directional movement actually lines up with the control pad, so if you want to walk directly upwards, you actually need to be holding up and left. When you start the game, your moveset isn't all that elaborate. You can move with the D-pad, jump with the A button, punch with the R button, of all things, and use various action commands with the B button. The L button is used to cycle through these commands. Of course, at the start you only have your grapple arm, which is used to capture the various DDs, and your hand to press buttons. Later on in levels, you're able to pick up several different items with varying levels of versatility. Differently colored key cards that are used to activate certain panels or machines throughout the room, these oddly colored batteries, which basically do the exact same thing as key cards, and ray guns, which for some reason you lose whenever you exit that particular area. There are also tools scattered around in various sections of Dexter's lab, like the screwdriver, pliers, wrench, and these are all used to fix the broken machines scattered around the different rooms. You don't lose these items whenever you enter a new room, however, so why couldn't the same be true for the ray gun? I mean, the key cards and batteries I kinda get because you can only put them in one panel and that's that, but the ray gun doesn't just spontaneously combust when you walk through a door, right? At the very least, you should get to keep a ray gun within the rest of the level. I'd have made it so you could find the gun in like area 1 or 2 and then continue to use it for the rest of the zone before losing it when you go back to the main starting area. The game does feature ammo as a separate pickup, so the balance could have been managed by making the ammo for it sparse, requiring the player to be smart with when they use their gun over getting close to punch enemies. After all, the only two methods Dexter can use to damage enemies is either shooting them from a safe distance with the gun, or getting up close and personal to punch them multiple times. Of course, risking your own health in the process. I feel like if the gun's feasibility was just balanced a bit better, it would allow the player to be more focused and decisive on when they decide to use it. Instead, the game usually gives you an overabundance of ammo to where it may as well just be unlimited for the one room that you're in. The combat in the game doesn't outright suck, but I think this would have introduced a more interesting element for sure. I hope you're a fan of Zelda games though, because just like Link, Dexter never knows when to shut up. Of course, considering you're going to be using the punch attack most of the time, you're probably going to end up taking damage quite a bit, but luckily there are health pickups in the form of these muffins and extra lives scattered throughout the levels. Yes, this game actually has a live system, and it can be pretty unforgiving. If you die, you respawn at the start of the room, but if you use up all your lives, you're booted back to the last time you saved the game, so save frequently. At the very least, this game has a save feature, which, believe it or not, was not always guaranteed to be in Game Boy Advance games back in the day. SpongeBob, I'm looking at you. But as far as completing the game goes, you're pretty much forced to 100% it if you want to see the ending. Sure, you can play the game just getting to the end of each stage, but then it just sort of ends after that. There's no final conclusion. I will add, however, that I'm usually the completionist type when it comes to games, so I was going to go for 100% completion anyways, so let me just say right off the bat that it wasn't really worth it. Minor spoilers for a game that's decades old, but the only reward you get for completing it is a 20-second cutscene of DD being spliced back together. Not really an enticing incentive for going for 100%, but hey, at least it's something. I wouldn't put this on the same level of underwhelming as something like, say, Mario Sunshine's Postcard or anything like that, but it's still not very fulfilling considering how long it takes to beat the game on a first playthrough. At the very least, I would have liked some cheat codes unlocked in the game. There are codes available for features like Moon Jump and extra lives and stuff like that, but you can just enter those at any point in order to activate them, so it's not really much of a reward. 100%ing Deesaster Strikes requires you to complete 2 primary objectives for every level in the game. Collect all of the DDs and fix all of Dexter's broken machines. As I said earlier, you fix the machines by collecting the 6 tools located throughout the different levels and then selecting each one needed at a particular machine in order to fix it. Simple and to the point. Collecting the DDs is the more tedious of the two, seeing as all you need to do is grab each DD with this grapple arm and then take them back to these transport tubes located around the levels in order to send them back to the giant collection machine. The best comparison I can give to this collection method is to that of Sonic 3D Blast, where you need to run around each isometric stage collecting flickies and then taking them back to the giant floating rings in order to complete each section. The major difference between Sonic 3D Blast and Deesaster Strikes is that in the latter's case, case, you can only carry one DD at a time, which leads to the game getting very repetitive with all of the back and forth you're forced to endure. You also can't attack anything while you're holding on to a DD, so you're forced to let go of her every time an enemy begins to engage you, unless you decide to just navigate around them. I recommend you go through every section clearing out the enemies first, and then going to collect the leftover DDs after the fact. It's just far easier doing it that way. Collecting the DDs can either go really smoothly or be a total pain in the ass depending on how their random movement decides to favor you. The thing about DD is that she just won't sit still. I can appreciate the game portraying her character accurately to the show, but sometimes if you're just really unlucky with trying to grab her, it can take you several attempts to get it right. The game did manage to make me feel how Dexter feels every time she bothers him though, so props to the game for getting me to connect with the character, I guess. There are a total of 124 DDs in the game. There are also 8 levels with 4 sections each, meaning that every single section, aside from the third section of the house level, has 4 DDs in them. I wouldn't say the levels in this game are teeming with life, but they do have some decent diversity that all fit the lab setting. You've got the robot production level, the flask level, the wrench level. Monkey also makes an appearance at one point in the botanical level, and okay, he's gone now. There's also this level that the game doesn't tell you how to access where you can get transported to an alien mothership by selecting it on the level select screen and taking the warp panel. I never actually realized this was how the level select works. Honestly, I just stumbled upon it by complete accident, so I can see how other players could get confused by this. At no point in the game does the game ever require you to do this otherwise, and quite frankly, it doesn't tell you how to do it either, so how is anybody supposed to figure that out? These particular warp panels are established in the game to take you right back to the main hub, but it never really indicates that you can take them in the opposite direction too, or that you can select any room you've previously been to on the computer screen. I honestly thought it was just a progress tracker. The last level, however, albeit a bit basic, is pretty cool. You actually get to leave Dexter's lab and roam around his house while you can chase down the last remaining DDs, although for whatever reason there's a really random runner section during part 3 of the stage. It's not bad or anything, it's just a quick 20-second on-rails reaction-based maze as you navigate Dexter through his local neighborhood. But it's kind of out of place given the rest of the game's flow. The last level also takes place at Dexter's school, but unfortunately there's no grand fanfare or final boss with Mandark or anything like that, which is a severely missed opportunity. In fact, there's no bosses at all in this game, which is extremely disappointing. It's just a level-to-level puzzle platformer that never really expands upon itself other than the occasionally more difficult enemy. I never really felt like there were new gimmicks or puzzles introduced aside from one-off switch pressing puzzles that never really go anywhere. My only major qualms with Deesaster Strikes from a gameplay perspective, other than the repetitive nature, is the unforgiving depth perception during particular platforming segments, as well as the inconsistent hit detection from certain enemies and robots. There were times while playing this game where I would just get stuck on enemies without any means of escape, only to watch my health bar skyrocket all the way down to 0 without anything I could do to stop it. It only really seemed to happen with these silver robots, which are invulnerable to all of your attacks, and after experiencing this for the first time, I pretty much knew to steer clear of them anytime they would show up. But still, I don't think this should have been allowed to happen at all. And I've also noticed how random objects in these levels have completely unnatural hitboxes. I swear this laser fence in particular during the alien level is completely off from what the sprite is indicating. I mean, look at this shit. I was nowhere near the laser gate and I got hit. I was just walking down the hallway, like, cut me some slack, seriously. And as is the nature with isometric platformers, I find certain sections difficult to judge where you're going to land, and it is especially nerve-wracking when having to jump across these moving pizzas over bottomless pits. I found myself falling off ledges where I clearly thought I was going to make it on a platform. Even this elevator section was super strict when I was able to make a jump off of a platform. And the worst part is that for whatever reason your drop shadow doesn't show when trying to jump across them specifically. Sure, you can see it anywhere else in the level, but not on the platforms where jumping is easily at its most difficult and you need to be the most precise, which means you need to see your drop shadow so you know exactly where you're gonna land. But logic, am I right? Without a doubt, the absolute biggest fundamental flaw with this game, however, is the infamous wrench glitch. In the final level of the game, you are required to use the wrench item in order to fix Dexter's sink, but depending on which version of the game you're playing, this could actually result in a game-breaking glitch where after you attempted to fix the sink, the wrench would be removed from your inventory and softlock you out of completing the game. Worst part is that, as I said, this is the final level of the entire game, meaning that you were likely to be 95% done with it by the time you got to this point. Several consumers at the time wrote into BAM Entertainment about the issue, and the company responded by telling them to send in their copies and they would send back replacements. But apparently, there was no guarantee that BAM would actually send the customers fixed copies for whatever reason, so even if people did get a new game back, it still could have been the glitched version. What the fuck? At the very least, you're able to tell whether you have the re-release or the original version based upon the serial number that's written on the front cover of the cartridge, according to the cutting room floor. I honestly wish I still had my copy of the game so I'd be able to determine which version I had, because I'm really curious, and considering I never beat the game as a kid, I never found out. Ultimately, if you have the fixed version of the game and intend to go for 100% completion, then I can recommend you give it a shot, but this game certainly isn't for everyone. I've certainly played worse in my time, and I'll probably cover worse on my channel as this series goes on, so I can say it's a mostly well put together game for a Game Boy Advance title. I had decent fun with this one. The puzzles in the game aren't very difficult to figure out despite what my 6-year-old self was led on to believe, and the enemies are all pretty simple to defeat, if kind of irritating when you get caught in a lock. I can recommend Deesaster Strikes to a Dexter's Lab fan way more easily than I can just a casual gamer. If you don't have any connection to the cartoon the game is based on, I can't really say you'd get as much enjoyment out of this one. I feel that this game could have done a lot more to include references to the show, but I'm more forgiving because it's a GBA title versus a console game. I can tell Deesaster Strikes had a degree of effort put into it, and the sprite work looks pretty good. I love the little details like Dexter getting mad at you for making him stand around. They just add that extra layer of charm that I appreciate so much in games and media. However, despite those minor positives, I don't see myself returning to this game anytime soon as a must-play or anything. It didn't blow me away, nor did I really expect it to, but it was a solid trip down memory lane, and I'm glad I gave the game a chance again after not playing it for over a decade. Deesaster Strikes? Pretty alright. But that's gonna do it for this review, so I'm going to end things off here. Until next time, Shadowstreak, signing off.